Good afternoon and welcome to the Glendale Water and Power Commission. Today is March 3rd, 2014. May we have roll call, please?
Commissioner Camargo?
Here.
Commissioner Chan? President Yao?
Present.
Commissioner Jimian?
Present.
Commissioner Hale?
That's it. Next item, please.
2. Consent items. A. Approval of the February 6, 2014 special meeting minutes.
I would like to delay that for the next meeting because I think two commissioners were here last meeting who were not here today, and the commissioner who's here but was at the last meeting. So I think it's best to delay that approval for the next meeting so we get more chance to review and approve it. Is that okay?
Sure.
So let's move that item for our next meeting for approval.
3. GWP Commission staff comments.
Any comments? Well, it's been a great weekend for rain, so I think we'll hear more about that, but it's a welcome surprise, I guess. It was pouring cats and dogs this past weekend, if you guys didn't notice. So good news for everyone for the water issue that we'll be talking about. Thank you. Next item, please.
4. Reports, information. A. Water supply and drought update.
Mr. Zone.
President, members of the Commission, I'll ask Mr. Boyd to come up and introduce our guest, who is here from MWD to give us a report. This may take a few minutes. Ramon's moving slowly.
And this is something that we had requested of staff, even though it's a water supply and drought update that we're going to recurring meeting from now on. But it was Commissioner Hare who suggested that we get an update from MWD, and so I thought it was a good idea to have this at this meeting, or if not, then next meeting. But Mr. Zun came through for this meeting.
Mr. Blake.
Mr. Blake, thank you.
Yeah, thank you for that introduction. I don't have to do much, but we did invite Mr. Dimitri Poliusos from Metropolitan Water District, and he's going to provide an update on the status of our water supply and drought and how MWD is handling that with the communications and public outreach. So,
great. Thank you. Good afternoon. Pleasure to be here. I wish I had better news to offer you all, but we are in a drought, and that is where we are. And I'd like to go through a few things to kind of bring us up to date on where we are exactly. So I am with Metropolitan Water District. We are a regional water wholesaler. We have 26 member agencies. The city of Glendale, of course, is one of them. We have or serve 19 million residents. We span 6 counties, 5,200 square miles, and we support a $1 trillion economy. Now, Metropolitan Water District has 3 main sources of imported water supplies. Well, actually, Southern California has 3 main sources, one of them being the Los Angeles Aqueduct. Now, this system is owned and operated by the Los Angeles Department of Water and Power. Metropolitan owns and operates the Colorado River Aqueduct. And Metropolitan also contracts with the state of California for water supplies from Northern California, and that's through the State Water Project. So we have a contract with the Department of Water Resources for nearly 2 million acre-feet of water per year. The main features of the State Water Project system are Lake Oroville up in Northern California, the Bay Delta itself, San Luis Reservoir, which is not shown on this map but is just south of the Bay Delta, and of course the aqueduct system itself shown in blue. So before we go into where we are today, we need to look at where we've been with our hydrology, and this is a look at 2013. This is basically shows the percent of average precipitation. And as you can see, for Northern California especially, the state is covered in the red colors, the red or the darker reds, and that denotes 5 to 10 to 20% of average. And this is a shot of the entire calendar year. So we ended up way below average for 2013. And in fact, it was the driest calendar year on record. Now, things didn't improve as we got into January of 2014. So at this point, I'm going to show us the water year. And that the water year starts, of course, in October. And so for the first 4 months, October through January, we actually had the driest beginning of a water year on record. So the dry conditions continued or persisted, and just 17% of average. And this is rainfall in Northern California. Here's another way of looking at that same information. This is looking at the water year. The blue band is basically the last 80 years of hydrologies that we've experienced. The bottom edge of this band is the low or the driest year we've ever seen in that 80 years. Only 17.1 inches in Northern California. The top of the band is the wettest year, 88.5 inches. Now what you see here is the blue line denotes the average, which is just over 50 inches. The white line is where we were last year, last water year. So the white line is October 2012 through September 2013. So as you can see, we had a great start to that water year, October, November, December. This is precipitation accumulation. But January 2013 on, we essentially flatlined. There was essentially very little precipitation. Now, if we fast forward or bring this up to January of this year, October through January, this is where we ended up, 4.5 inches. Again, that's that driest year on record, continuing into this current water year and being the driest. In fact, we're so dry, we're drier than the driest we've ever seen. There you go, unprecedented dry conditions. All right, so that's rainfall. Let's look at the snowpack. This is the second survey. The Department of Water Resources goes up and actually conducts snow surveys. Here's the snow survey. As you can see, not much snow, and in fact, the driest snowpack on record when this was done at the end of January. And pictures are worth 1,000 words, but satellite images, in my opinion, are worth even more. This is what a normal snowpack looks like in January. This is what it looked like last year. This is what it looked like this past January. You can tell the difference. I'll just toggle between the two so you can really see. So driest year on record right here. This is what a normal looks like. This is where we're at. So looking in a little more closely around the state, in particular in Northern California, this is Folsom Lake near Sacramento. Now, folks, this is the backside of the reservoir. This is not what you're not supposed to see the dam here. You're supposed to see water on this side. Here's another reservoir in Northern California. Things are popping up that people have never seen before in these reservoirs because they're at such a low level. And here's something that none of the State Water Project contractors, Metropolitan included, never want to see. This is the main reservoir system in the State Water Project system, Lake Oroville. And you can see at the end of last year how low it was. You can see where the water line is on the bridge in the distance there. So far, way below normal. And just another reservoir in California. So given all this, the Department of Water Resources sets its allocation for the year. Given the dry conditions in 2013, they essentially looked at the reservoir levels, they looked at the forecast, and said that they can only support a 5% allocation. That was the initial allocation. And that's actually ties for the second lowest initial allocation ever. The first time they've done that was in 2010. In that year, thankfully, the allocation jumped to 50% by the end of the year. But we are where we are today, November. Now, the Department of Water Resources updates their allocation studies about once a month. And in the next two updates at the beginning and end of December, there was nothing in the forecast that gave them enough confidence to increase the allocation. So it remained at 5%. But because how dry conditions remained in January, so basically 5% basically means 95 or 96,000 acre feet. So our contract total is just under 2 million acre feet. So 5% is just a mere 95,000 acre feet. With the dry conditions persisting, last month the Department of Water, or actually now 2 months ago, the Department of Water Resources said that it would not be able to support any allocations. So basically 0%. And that's actually the first time in the 54-year history of the State Water Project that it's announced the 0% allocation. So of that 2 million acre feet that Metropolitan's contract supply, 0%. 0 acre feet. So a couple things that have occurred in recent time here. Governor Brown did declare a state drought of emergency, and two things came out of that. A couple things came out of that. One was he called on all citizens throughout the state to conserve their water use. And to conserve their water use by 20%. He also asked that his state departments work together to facilitate the movement of water in the state. Essentially, where water is available, help move that water to where it's most needed. So those are basically transfer and exchange programs. We'll get into that in a little bit. And in that spirit of working together, both the Department of Water Resources and the Bureau of Reclamation, and the Bureau of Reclamation operates the Central Valley Project, the two main water systems in the state, Central Valley and the State Water Project systems. Both came together and petitioned for relaxation on some of the requirements in the Delta through the State Water Resources Control Board. And they were able to do that, and they were successful, essentially reducing the outflow requirements in the Delta. Essentially what that means is it helps preserve the water, the very little water that's stored in both Oroville and Shasta. Again, Oroville is part of the State Water Project system. This helped preserve the water in that reservoir and not let it flow out into the Delta and into the bay. It also provided for some flexibility in the Delta itself in managing that system. It allowed for opening and closing of certain key gates that helps freshen up the interior Delta. The problem in the Delta right now is salinity. And the Department of Water Resources and the Central Valley Project, the Bureau of Reclamation, are responsible to keep salinity levels at bay, essentially, and keep them low. And one of the ways they can do that is to operate these gates. Now, Governor Brown also made an unprecedented visit to Metropolitan's headquarters in Los Angeles. Many things that were discussed, but one of the things that they talked about was how Metropolitan can help with the rest of the state. I showed you pictures of how Northern California is faring, and they're not doing very well as far as the reservoir levels. Reservoir levels in Southern California seemed to be, at that time, higher than Northern California. So, there was a call to what can Metropolitan do to help with the rest of the state. Subsequent to that meeting, Metropolitan did a few things. Its board, via a resolution, declared a regional water supply alert. This, of course, supports the governor's call for a 20% reduction in water use. It also doubled its conservation budget. Doubled it from $20 million to $40 million. So this is increased outreach, additional incentive programs with the existing programs that exist. We also are committing ourselves to stay in conversation or discussions with the rest of the water agencies across the state to see if there are ways to help. In other words, how can Metropolitan help with the existing infrastructure that it has invested in through the last 20, 30 years? How can it apply that and help with the rest of the state? In addition, there are operational changes we're doing here in region to help stretch out the supplies that we do have. So, in recent events, it finally rains. Now the question is it enough? This is what that same map I showed you earlier looks like for the month of February. You can see now Northern California has less obnoxious colors. You've got more greens and blues and purples, signifying actually above normal percent of average of precipitation. And this is the first month this has occurred in 13 or 14 months where we have above normal precip. Now this is again just looking at the month of February. So we saw some things occur with the two main storms that came through in February. First, we saw an increase in elevation at Oroville. In fact, we saw a gain of 164,000 acre-feet of water supply. In the Delta, we were able to capture the supplies that were flowing through. This graphic just shows you how export pumping increased from the very low levels that they were leading into February and most of the month. And then we were able to increase pumping by 7 times to capture those flows. And the third piece here, the San Luis Reservoir increase. Now this reservoir is shared by both the Bureau of Reclamation for the Central Valley Project and also the Department of Water Resources for the State Water Project. The blue line is the total storage gain, 65,000 acre-feet in these storms. The green line shows you the State Water Project share, 27,000 acre-feet. The point here is that these storms came through. We saw some benefits. We the Department of Water Resources acted and moved as much water as it could that was in the Delta into San Luis, plus those supplies that increased in Lake Oroville. So we did see some benefits from these storms. However, the problem is we're still below average, 47%. And again, back to this graphic, which I think really shows the situation we're in. Again, this is where we were before the storms, very bleak, way below the lowest or driest year on record. What did the storms do for us? Increased to just above the driest year on record. So yes, storms were good. We want more of them, but this is where we are right now. And then always the question becomes, where are we heading? So if we project out where we think we'll be, at least what we think we'll see in the remaining months, based on what we've seen in history. So let's show the driest and the wettest band from this point forward. This is what we're looking at. So as you can see, even if we have the wettest March, April, May, June throughout the rest of the water year, we're still going to end up below normal. So these are the extremes. It's more probable that we see something closer to this. There we go. That's what we typically call our 90 to 10% exceedance range. So this is a more probable case. And the most probable is this, essentially ending up the year with 31.3 inches or so. And that's about 60% of normal. And just another way of looking at this, I've gone around to different agencies talking about our water supply situation, and at least through the end of February, we were third. We were the driest, now we're at third. And we always talk about this March miracle. Well, these are the driest 9 years that we've seen on record. And those years, shown in blue, ended up looking like this for those particular years. So again, all underneath or under the average. So in 2014, let's just say we had a repeat of one of those years that had a March miracle, like 1991. Well, stack that on top, and again, we're about that 30, 35-inch range. So I guess the point I'm driving home is, yeah, the rains, the storms were good. Even if we see many more of them, as many as we've seen in the past, we're still going to end up this year below average. Now, Metropolitan has other sources of supplies, one of them being, as I mentioned earlier, the Colorado River. Now, its hydrology is doing a little bit better. Before the storms, they were nearly normal. And what I'm showing here is snowpack. So the blue band is basically the normal snowpack as it accumulates and melts. The white line is how we fared last year, and the orange line is where we are, at least in this shot, at the beginning of February prior to the storms. This is how we jumped up. So that system is doing much better as far as the snowpack goes, 115% of normal. But we need to remember that the Colorado system itself is in a prolonged drought period, a 14-year drought period, in fact. And what this graphic shows you is the planned releases from Lake Powell to Lake Mead. And that's essentially Metropolitan takes water from Lake Mead. But the water in Lake Mead comes from Lake Powell. And this, the Colorado River system does things a little differently. They plan far in advance. And they've already, given how dry conditions have been over the last 14 years, they've already said that they're going to release 7.5 million acre feet, which is the first time they've released that low levels from Powell. Normally, they release a little bit over 8 million acre feet. There are a couple years in there that were really wet, and they were able to release more. But in general, it's a little bit over 8 million acre feet. Unfortunately, given the conditions on that system and how the reservoir levels are at, they're looking at lower releases. So the problem with this is lower releases from Powell means less water in Lake Mead. And in Lake Mead, when you get to certain levels, low levels, they can issue a shortage. And so you never want to get to that point. That system has never hit shortage. This graphic or table shows us the probability of hitting shortage. Now, again, in the next 2 years, we're fine. In 2016, they're estimating that Lake Mead there's a 44% chance of hitting shortage in Lake Mead. And as you can see, as the years go out, at least right now, they're projecting that to go higher and higher. So and the other thing to take from this graphic is there are more chances of hitting a shortage in Lake Mead than hitting a surplus. So again, dry conditions on that system as well. So what is our plan to get through now that I've, I think, depressed everyone in the room? For 2014, our main sources of imported supplies on the State Water Project system, we are or have identified 600,000 acre feet of supplies. Again, I know I mentioned that there's zero allocation. That's contract supplies. We have other supplies on the State Water Project system that we will tap into, and most of those are storage programs to the tune of 600,000 acre feet. And again, on the Colorado River side, we're looking at a full aqueduct, meaning we're running that system full bore, bringing in as much water as we can, 1.2 million acre feet. So if we look at our supply-demand balance, the supplies I just showed on the prior slide equal 1.8 million acre feet. Now our total demand is now, or currently forecasted to be 2 million acre feet. So that gives us an in-region or a deficit of 200,000 acre feet. And the burden of on that is going to really rely on our in-region sources, and mainly Diamond Valley Lake. And just to visually show you where these supplies come from, that 600,000 acre feet that I talked about from the State Water Project System are these various programs along the aqueduct system. Groundwater banking programs, supplies that we've left in San Luis from last year that we're going to tap into, and various other programs. These are the supplies from the Colorado River. We have water banked in Lake Mead as well that we're going to be tapping into to equal or to get us to that 1.2 million acre feet. And of course, that difference, that deficit comes from our in-region, again, mainly Diamond Valley Lake. Now, there's a couple of things that will help potentially. These are just those same supplies stacked up. Again, 2 million being the demand level that we're looking at. Now, there's one thing that is outside of our control, and that's the hydrology. If that improves, that will help reduce the pull on these storage programs. The other, which we have control over, of course, is our water use practices. So conservation is really a key in all of this in helping reduce our demand and manage those demands. And again, reduce our pull from these storage programs. Because it's not just getting through the current year. It's really planning and setting us up well for the following years. So for instance, for 2015, we want to have a fair amount of reserves, storage reserves, to get through that year, like we did in past years. So for example, in 2013, we had 2.4 million acre feet in reserves. And we're going to pull on at least, or right now, we're looking at 1.1 million acre feet to get through this year. And that's what's shown here. Now, of course, storage use will vary depending, again, on what our supplies end up looking like and also what demand management we can do. But that's where we're at today. So this is our plan to get through. We do have a plan. We have identified supplies to get through 2014. The question is, how deep do we go into our reserves so that we can manage through yet another dry year should 2015 prove to be such. And with that, I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Any questions?
Yes, thank you for the information. Question in terms of, does the department have a perspective on climate issues like El Nino and prospect for that coming through anytime in the next couple of years?
Yeah, they have indicated that they're seeing a signal of an El Nino forming. The only problem with that is it could go either way for Northern California. It typically means wetter for Southern California, but for Northern California, it could be a hit or miss. It could be either wet or dry. But they are showing that there isn't a signal of the water temperatures in the Pacific such that there is a signal for an El Nino forming later this year.
Thank you, Mr. Polizo, right?
Yes.
Polizo, thank you for that great presentation.
Great.
I just have a question that may relate to our local utility in particular. You mentioned after the governor declared the state of emergency, MWD declared a regional water supply alert to support a 20% reduction. Is that based on last year or a different base year, the 20% reduction?
Yeah, I'm not exactly sure what the base year was on that. I think they actually look at an average rolling 5 years. It's either 5 or 3 years, but I can get that answer for you. But it's not one particular year, it's an average.
Okay, so in general, you want the local water agencies to comply with that 20% suggested reduction?
Absolutely, absolutely.
Because in the past, when in the last drought we had, I think we used a different base year than a 3-year average or a 5-year average. We used whatever the year that was consistent flow. So I guess we would want to be consistent with what MDD is suggesting.
Right, and I think those get more honed in or rolled out if it becomes a mandatory reduction. Right now it's a voluntary call. So I think what we're doing is allowing the cities and the various municipalities and the agencies to determine how they're going to implement that. I have not heard specifics on how that would be.
And true, but are there any funding? You mentioned that there's a $40 million conservation budget that was double from what you had. How would that fund be filtered down to the local munis or the local residents?
Yeah, again, that is with our conservation folks on how they implement it, but it's through our rebate program. And so it's the same program that exists now, it's just bringing in more funds. So it's the same, you know, the barrels, the different fixtures, all those different things, efficiencies, just more dollars behind it, so more rebates available. So I don't think anything has changed from what is the standard now, it's just more funding available.
Okay, so maybe some program exceed the budget now, there'll be more funds
There's
for
more
additional
funds. Yes.
rebates. Maybe you can have more questions.
Just one question. Since the voluntary conservation was rolled out, what kind of an impact have you seen with the recent month or 2 months? How's it going?
We actually have not seen anything yet. These things do take some time. And again, Southern California we've already been conserving. So we're already conserving more than Northern California. That's what the studies or the plans that I've seen. So it may take some time to see that impact. We're hoping by the summertime we will see an actual measurable impact.
Summertime, okay.
I just have a couple questions about water supply, because you keep hearing that we're living near the coast, so desalination always comes up. I mean, I know that's expensive still. Can you maybe comment on that and maybe let the public know why it's being considered or why it's not being considered?
Well, we are funding programs or pilot programs. We do have some funding available for those programs, and there are, I'm not sure, 3 or 4 programs that we're currently funding. But yeah, it's small scale. It is expensive still, very expensive, and it's just not of all the things we can do, it's not the most feasible at this point. We have other programs that we will go to first because of availability, access, and cost.
Can you give us a range of what those costs are? Because I hear, I mean, it could be $1,500 per acre foot back then, but it hasn't
Exactly,
changed.
yeah. I've heard 15 all the way up to $3,000 dollars an acre foot. So it's quite substantially higher than any other of the programs we have.
Well, compared to maybe potentially getting additional water from the State Water Project or additional supply from the Colorado Project, how would that compare if it were needed? If you have no desalination, so you can't draw from that, maybe storage is to be depleted. What is the contingency for additional supply? Do we just pay more and we get more, or that doesn't work that way?
It doesn't work for us as the regional wholesaler. These are the supplies. They are what they are. Thanks to some good planning that we've done, we do have quite a bit of water in storage programs, and we're tapping into those to get through. But unfortunately, we can't make it rain. We've tried, but we
can pray for it.
We can, and we saw some come through, which is good. Locally, if it rains like we have seen, I think we measured 4.5 inches in downtown LA, significant amount of rain. That also helps reduce our demands as well. For those agencies that do groundwater replenishment, they turn to us to help replenish those groundwater basins. But if it rains, and well, like what we saw, and we actually seen that, we've seen them turn back on that call for water, and that helps with the demands. But if it dries up again, we might see that come back. So there's really, in the toolbox that we have, the supply is finite, and we're maxing out our Colorado River supplies. The supplies from the California Aqueduct, which is LADWP supplies, they're in the same situation as the State Water Project. Northern California and the Southern Sierra is dry. This storm did help with their supplies. It brought them to 50% of normal, so that's a good sign. But will that continue? So there's not a whole lot we can do, but just more efficiently use the supplies that we do have.
Well, maybe one last question before I pass it on to other commissioners. Considering I just lost my train of thought. I was going to talk about some environmental impact, but that potentially we take our cue from MWD, because I think staff in GWP says that we'll continue the voluntary reduction, but when would MWD implement any mandatory reduction? What are the phases to that?
Yeah, let me bring back this slide. Yeah. So the plan to get through this year taps into about 1.1 million acre feet, and that's the most we've ever tapped into our reserves. Typically, when we get into a mandatory type of discussion, it's when we're left with about 1 million acre feet. That's what happened the last time we issued mandatory back in 2008, I believe, is when we had just 1 million or so acre feet in reserves. We're not quite there yet for this year. We'll make it through this year without it, so we are not necessarily planning on a mandatory reductions for 2014. Depending on how we end up this year, though, that could be a different story for 2015. Because then you can see we are close to that 1 million. We'll end up the year, in the worst case scenario, above 1 million, but we're getting close. And typically, in a dry year, not every drought is the same. Typically in a dry year, we pull about 500,000 acre feet or so. And you'll see that in the history. That's about how much we tap into our reserves. This year is quite a unique year, as we've seen, unprecedented conditions, very, very dry, 0% allocation, first time ever. That's why we're seeing a big draw on reserves. We're hoping that won't be the case. So we'll end the year a little higher than what the worst case is showing here. So again, those mandatory restrictions start happening when our reserve levels are closer to 1 million acres.
And you don't anticipate that happening for 2014?
We don't. Even in our worst case scenario right now, we have found ways to get us through this year.
Great, thank you. Anybody else have questions? Well, that's it. Thank you, Mr. Palacios.
Thank you.
It was great having you.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Let's move on to the next item, please.
4B, Legislative Advocate Update.
Mr. Zone.
We'll go to Mr. Lenz.
Mr. President, members of the Commission, Steve Lenz, Chief Assistant General Manager. I'd like to introduce you to Kira Emanuels Ross. She is with Emanuels Jones and Associates. They are GWP's new lobbyist for water and power issues in Sacramento. They've also been hired by the City of Glendale to be a lobbyist for city issues as well. Kira's been with the firm for 2 years. Prior to that, she was with the League of California Cities for 5 years, working on environmental issues, including air, water, CEQA, solid waste, and energy. And then for 10 years, she actually was working up in Sacramento, the last 3 years of which she was a chief consultant to the Assembly National Resources Committee. So today she's going to talk to you a little bit about the status of water and power bills that have been introduced in Sacramento, and also talk to you a little bit about some funds that have been made available for shovel-ready projects related to the drought. And then Mr. Abweg will talk a little bit about the projects that we're thinking about submitting for some of those funds.
Good afternoon, Mr. President and members of the Commission. I'm Kira Emanuels Ross, as Mr. Lenz said, and I'm with Emanuels Jones and Associates, and really wanted to give you an update in terms of what we see coming forward this year in both the water and power categories. And let's start with water. It's been a really big year, and you just got a really good update about what's going on. In addition to the governor declaring an emergency drought, we also had a package of 2 bills that went through on an extraordinarily fast pace. In fact, it went through in 2 days this last week and was signed on Saturday by the governor. This is a package of $683.5 million. It will go directly towards drought relief programs throughout the state. It is essentially expediting funds that are there today. So Prop 84, Prop 1E, greenhouse gas emission funds, so out of the cap and trade products and general fund dollars. A lot of these were already in the governor's budget or already in the pipeline to go out later this year or potentially next year. The thought behind these 2 bills, SB 103 and SB 104, are that what they will do is expedite them on a very, very fast pace with the intention of getting these out to local agencies, cities, counties, et cetera, no later than about June of this year. And I'll come back and talk a little bit about shovel ready and what they're looking for and what we think that might mean. But for now, I'm going to jump forward and talk a little bit about the rest of water and then come back. Also up this year, a big issue that we'll be talking about a lot going forward is the water bond. There's an existing $11.1 billion bond that's on the budget today. That bond is slated for the November ballot this fall. In the past, there was a lot of discussion that this would not go forward because voters in California were not interested in passing an $11.1 billion bond. And there's also a lot of talk about, does it have pork inside the bond? Is it the right amount? Is it the right level? There's been a lot of discussion. There have been some polling that suggested that really we ought to be looking more at about $7-8 billion as opposed to 11. We're not exactly sure what the voters' appetite is, but interestingly enough, over the last couple of weeks, the most recent surveys and polling that's been done by PPIC and others is now suggesting that the more drought we have, the closer we are to 11.1. That said, there are now 8 different bond vehicles. There was a handout that I believe that you have that has the 3 leading vehicles, which just is to give you a sense of what they have in them. They're different pricing on each of the bonds. I think you have, the one you have has AB 1331, which is the Assembly Democrats proposal, and then SB 848, which is the Senate proposal, Senate Democrats, and then also SB 927, which is one of the Senate Republican proposals. There's a lot of discussion that's going to happen on this. It's still unclear where the governor is and whether he wants something on the ballot and what that may mean in terms of his decision-making and his work that he's doing on things like high-speed rail and other issues. We do have a bit of time on the water bonds, and this is kind of important because we have until probably late July or early August when the final decisions have to be made. And so between now and then, we're going to see a new leader in the Assembly. We're probably going to see some new chairs of committees, and we're going to see a lot of discussion around the budget and other issues. And depending on where the drought goes, it may influence what they decide to do. Furthermore, this is a 2/3 vote of the legislature to both take the $11.1 billion bond off the ballot and a 2/3 vote to get a new bond on the ballot. It's also something where this will be one of the few chances for Republicans in the state legislature to have leverage on an issue, given that with the majority vote budget, they really don't have a lot of ability to have leverage. So this will be one of their few opportunities. And just this last week, the Senate lost their supermajority status. So they are now down 1 vote in the Senate of having supermajority. So there's a lot that's going to happen in terms of politics on this, and there's a lot of discussion to be had going forward. Also up this year will be the issue of groundwater and groundwater management and what we do with that, and groundwater supply. What do we look at it going forward? This was a really big issue in 2009, the last time we looked at the water bond. It continues to be a big issue. There's a hearing next week on the 11th of March to look at how the state manages its groundwater and what we're going to do going forward. The administration has a spot bill that they're looking at. A number of authors have bills, including Senator Pavley. And we'll be continuing to look at this issue going forward, what it may mean, what types of additional monitoring we need to look at, and what are the opportunities for groundwater in the state going forward in terms of supply, conservation, how it fits into the larger picture of water. A couple of other issues in the water world that we're going to continue to monitor. The Governor's State Water Action Plan. This is the Governor Administration's plan and how we move forward in water in California in the next 10 to 15, 20 years. If you look at the drought legislation over the last week that just went forward, you'll find that it almost perfectly aligns with the State Water Action Plan. This is the Governor's plan as to where we're going to go, and so it's something that we're paying very close attention to and looking at legislation that relates to the Governor's plan. The transfer of drinking water division within the California Department of Public Health to the State Water Board, this is another issue. It's not necessarily something that has absolute direct impact, but given that Chrome 6 has been a real big issue in this area, it's something that we've been monitoring very carefully. We think that the Chrome 6 issue will be done and taken care of prior to the transfer. Originally, we thought that Chrome 6 would be the first issue to be taken up under the new State Water Board EPA format for drinking water, but instead we think Chrome 6 will actually be dealt with at the department before it goes over to its new home. But it's something that we'll have to watch for further action in the future and what that might mean for drinking water. Water recycling, this is another very big issue. The governor has mentioned on several occasions that he wants to see more water recycling in California. There is a bill that is co-sponsored by the California Water Agencies and by CMUA, the California Municipal Utility Association. It would provide a CEQA exemption for up to 8 miles of recycled water. That's going to be carried by Assemblyman Nazarian. It's going to be AB 2680. It's in what's known as a spot bill form right now, and that's where they put some placeholder language. It is not fleshed out. It's not in a form that if you were to pull it up and read it online, you could see any of the details at this point. But we will continue to have that discussion and what it might mean and how potentially getting around CEQA on that or having some type of an exemption for water recycling projects could help those move forward on a faster, more expedited basis. And the final bill that I think may be helpful to kind of look at is SB 1049 by Senator Pavley. And this is one where it's going to look at existing water regional projects and how energy is used with those, specifically with the transfer of movement of water in California and how much energy is used and how we can reduce the amount of energy and thereby reduce the amount of greenhouse gases. And this is an interesting crossover where we're beginning to see energy and water crossover on some of the bills this year. We're going to see it there. We may potentially see it with the drought on things like hydro. If we do not have, eventually if you don't have the water, you can't get the energy out of hydro. So there are pieces where we're beginning to watch this crossover, and SB 1049 is one of these, where it's beginning to look at some of these issues. And then many of the water issues I've mentioned are also embedded in the Air Resources Board AB 32 scoping plan update, and this is dealing with cap and trade and greenhouse gas emissions, including promoting less intensive water management and addressing statewide groundwater management policies. And this is a plan that they are updating right now. They have to do a 5-year update on their scoping plan. We'll be watching that very carefully because it's not something that will have to go back to the legislature. It gives regulatory power to the state Air Resources Board, where they can determine some of these actions that have to happen, and they will happen. So it's something that it could potentially have a lot of impact. On the energy side this year, we've already had some ongoing discussions on the existing RPS and where things will go in future years. What about beyond 33%, and what does that look like? At the recent CMUA Day, you may have heard at your last briefing, the larger group advocated for increased flexibility going forward. The state's going to set a number. We need the flexibility locally so that we can determine what is the right mix of renewable energy for your local community. There are several bills that are in spot form at this point. They don't have any meat in them, so it's hard to say exactly what they'll look at. I think the key that we'll be watching for is July 1st is the expected date of a CEC report that will be a report that will come out that will show what the munis have all said in terms of their last reporting. Are they meeting their goals and what needs to happen? And typically what happens when you have a release of a report like that is that you will get what are called gut and amends. So someone will start to change the legislation, they'll quickly run new legislation, and we'll see a larger discussion happen at that point. We happen to have a break from July 4th to August 4th. That gives people just enough time to kind of get together and talk about legislation, and I would not be surprised in August if we don't see some reactionary legislation to what the CEC report potentially says. And then ultimately what the Air Resources Board does in their scoping plan, again under AB 32, may be of greater impact to long-term utilities than RPS targets. And in the proposed scoping plan update, the ARB has noted that California will be unable to achieve the needed greenhouse gas emissions within the energy sector by simply continuing or modestly expanding on current energy conservation, efficiency, and generation decarbonizing program efforts. And this is a really critical piece to this, is that what they're saying in their scoping plan is we can't do what we're doing today. We're going to have to take greater action. So as that moves forward, we'll continue to watch what the scoping plan draft that's out now and as it gets closer to its final form. There is one bill on this, SB 1125 by Senator Pavley, that is really seen as the key vehicle for the scoping plan. So we'll be continuing to talk to her office and work on that to make sure that the impacts are not too great. Speaking of AB 32, lots of discussion right now up in Sacramento about the use of the cap and trade funds, where those will go. There's been a lot of talk about the governor trying to steal $500 million of it to use it for high-speed rail. There's a lot of discussion about transportation needing funds. There's also a $100 million pot for local governments for greenhouse gas reduction projects. There's an additional $20 million for non-transportation greenhouse gas projects for local governments. So there are some opportunities in there for communities to go after some of the funds. And then there was a bill that was introduced last week by Senator Steinberg, which is SB 1156, and this is a new carbon tax. And what he is proposing to do is to effectively remove all of the transportation fuels away from the cap-and-trade program and instead do a straight carbon tax on consumers at the gas pump. So you would pay 15 cents per gallon additional or 10 cents per gallon additional, as opposed to this going through the cap and trade program. In addition to that, for people that earn less than about $50,000, they could get a tax rebate under their earned income tax credit on an annual basis and get a rebate on their gas prices from that. There's a lot of discussion about whether this is really redistribution of wealth in California, which it is at some level, and what that might mean for the broader cap and trade program if you lose the biggest component of that. What does that do to the market? People are really counting on this huge influx of transportation fuels coming in and creating better pricing on the cap and trade market. So it's going to be a lot of discussion about what that might mean. Is it better to do a straight tax, or is it better to require transportation fuels to have to go through the program? And I think you'll also hear from other folks that are in the program right now that are saying, hey, we didn't get out of this. We have to be in this program. How can they get out and just get a straight tax? So this will be an ongoing discussion going forward over the next several months. The other bills we're watching, SB 456 by Senator Padilla is a power content labeling bill that's been of some concern to municipal utilities over the last month. It deals with how you label the power that you receive, power that goes out into your community, but the labeling is different between what you submit to the state in terms of your mix and what goes out to your consumers, and we have some concern over what that might look like. There's a couple bills on saltancy and geothermal resources that we'll continue to watch about what that might look like. Prop 39 implementation. There's several bills on that issue. And then energy storage. There's several bills that will look at potentially where we go with energy storage and the recent mandates on IOUs to be looking at that. Finally, another interesting issue, SB 1020 by Senator Monning is looking at a newer issue that's coming up, but one that I think will continue to grow, and that is solar panel collection and recycling. There's a newer issue with what do you do with old solar panels and old inverters. Inverters are lasting about 10 years, solar panels 20 to 30 years, but they are considered hazardous waste. So when people are done with them, where do they go? Do they go back? Do the solar companies come and collect these hazardous wastes? Who has to deal with it? Is it a city? Is it utility? Where is it? Who is the collector of these? And what do we do with this hazardous waste? In early years of things like computer screens, we shipped them all to China, or they went to Mexico. We're not interested in shipping them to other countries, so we need to figure out how we deal with the waste and what the future of that is. So I think that'll be a very informative discussion, and I think it will also provide some looking forward in terms of other types of electrical paneling and things like that, and where those might go. So I've given you a lot of information. This is obviously not a complete list. It's really just spotlighting what we think are some of the big issues coming up. And finally, I think it's important to note that we are going to see some major changes in the Assembly this year. In the summer, we'll see the changeover of the Assembly leadership from Speaker Perez, who's out of Los Angeles, to the new Speaker, who will be Toni Atkins, Assemblywoman Atkins out of San Diego. That will play, I'm sure, some level of a role in terms of water bond and water discussions when your leader is from San Diego. In the Senate, we are also going to see that change. It will probably happen more towards September. Pro Tem Steinberg will be leaving, and the new Pro Tem will be De Leon, who is out of Los Angeles. And then on the energy committees, we're expecting to see both leaders potentially leave of those committees. So Senator Padilla, who heads up the Senate Energy Committee, has already announced he's running for the Secretary of State position, and has really begun to focus on that. And in the Assembly, because Senator Wright is now on indefinite leave, if he does leave, it's expected that Assemblyman Bradford will run for his seat. So we're likely to see some shifts in leadership on all levels. It's going to be an interesting year, given that the Senate already has a lot of work in terms of it's lost its supermajority, it's down 2 members. They've got to figure out a little bit of where they're going. Our budget is continuing to move forward. The subcommittees, which negotiate out the details, have begun meeting. They'll continue meeting through May. And the legislative policy committees will begin in the next 3 to 4 weeks, really after about March 20th. And so we'll start to see a lot more of the details of bills come up at that point. So I'll stop there, and maybe we could talk a little bit about shovel ready and then take some questions.
Unless anyone has questions about any particular bills, maybe save for later then. Sure, you can continue with the shovel-ready.
Yeah, so the shovel-ready, I can sort of talk a little bit if you want to come up. Okay, and shovel-ready, essentially what they are looking at is, for each of these programs, when they talk about shovel-ready projects, they're looking at projects that the permitting is largely done, the planning is completely done, that when the money hits the ground, you can get it out very quickly. They're looking for projects that if they say you get it in June, they don't want the project to wait for 9 months before it starts. Because of the urgency of the drought situation, we're really looking at types of projects where you can make an immediate impact quickly and get it done right away. Money is, there's a lot of money out there. The one thing I didn't mention is there's a lot of discussion right now, and it's expected there will be a second drought package coming forward in the next couple of weeks. And in addition to that, there's probably some additional funding that will go in the budget at some level. So this is not something that's expected to just be done on one-shot deal. We're going to be continuing to talk about it and continuing to look at different types of projects. You want to talk about the specific ones? Or?
Good afternoon, President Yao, members of the Commission. We did identify 3 projects that I believe, or we believe would help with, it's mainly on the extension of our recycled water. We identified 3 projects that have started way back that we never could get going because of budget issues. And it's about 3.5, 4 miles of total extension of recycled water. One of it is going to a neighborhood that's been requesting recycled water to be extended to them. And then the 4th project is the further exploration so we can get pump more water, get the water going from the Rockhaven well. So it's 3 recycled water projects, different locations, and the Rockhaven well project.
Could you remind us those 3 projects? One was to the homeowners association, right? And then the other one was like to the golf course.
One of them is what goes to from Glen Oaks Boulevard to Concord. It goes to the 3 schools, Hoover, Tall, and Keppel, so we can help them with the watering. The other one is we met with the Chevy Chase Oaks community. It's along Chevy Oaks Drive after the fire. They were concerned about that. And the other one is, like you said, the Camino Centerville community. Those recycled waters have been estimated and preliminary designs have been completed. The most advanced of those is the one that goes to the Hoover, Toll, and Keppel schools. That design on that is 90% complete.
So we're going to submit these proposals for funding from the state?
That is correct. And there's one more project that I can't speak about because we haven't come into an agreement with CB about another potential use of recycled water. I met with them Friday, but we haven't really concluded how we're going to move forward.
Questions about that? So let's get back on the Assembly bills and the Senate bills. Thank you, Ms. Ross, for the update. I mean, that's very comprehensive. I understand that just the beginning stages, all the bills have been pretty much put in so that they can be considered, and there'll be additional amendments and gut and amend, and there'll be positions taken by different parties. So for this commission, I think we agreed in the past that we'll be making recommendations, if we have time, to the city council and to the city manager on what positions to take, and I'm sure GWP has been consistent with CMUA as well on certain positions. But isn't there a way to get a list of all the bills that you mentioned? I'm sure Mr. Lins will help out too, is to have a spreadsheet of those bills and then the description that you have some examples here, and potentially put in what CMUA position would be, and potentially if Mr. Lins or Mr. Zone can put in what the GWP position potentially could be, it could be consistent with CMUA as well, and then have that discussion among this commission whether we would support those type positions as recommendations to the City Council on what positions that this commission would recommend, whether that be support or oppose or being consistent with what staff has suggested. But I'm sure this commission would look at that, and if it makes sense for GDP, I think it makes sense for our city. And so I think that was a past discussion on what we would like to see is a list of bills, their description, and what the position is for CMUA and GWP, and then we can move forward from there.
Absolutely, and it's something I can easily do. And what I will also say is the only reason I didn't give you a comprehensive list today is that we're so new that a lot of the bills are, we aren't quite sure which ones will be the final vehicles. So we will produce a list by the end of this week that will go out to GWP staff that we can also at that point begin to customize for you with whatever information you'd like on it. I'm happy to do that and happy to provide any updates through Steve and through the staff that you would like in terms of if you need more detail on a bill to have a better discussion or positions or background sheets or any of those kinds of information. Absolutely happy to do that.
Great. Any other comments?
Yes, thank you for the information, Ms. Ross. So just to clarify, at this stage then, your firm is primarily in an assessment mode, or are you actually pushing for and lobbying for certain legislation?
Excuse me, both. We are in the second year of a 2-year cycle. So what we've just finished in January was all of the bills that were in the first house. So Assembly bills had to get out of the Assembly, Senate bills had to get out of the Senate. And so we had a flurry of activity then where we did advocate on certain bills that we were directed to. And then going forward, we're now in a little bit of a lull until about the 4th week of March, where we're going through the bills that have just been introduced. We had about 2,000 bills in the last week and a half, and so we're going through all of those and identifying ones. And so we're getting our lists out, and then we'll begin the process again where we send them out, have staff go through the bills, figure out which ones are out there. We work with CMUA, we work with the League of Cities, with all the different associations and entities. So we'll move forward on that.
Thank you.
I'm interested in the Energy Water Nexus bill by Pavley.
Mm-hmm.
What kind of impact would that have on the city? Because we're both a water and electric utility. Are they talking about any shift in costs or savings? Let's say if you convey less water, do they expect the energy savings to be there? And then I don't know what they're going to do with that. Just use it as a tax or something? Or?
Yeah, and this one, it deals with regional planning. And so what she's looking at is through the integrated regional management planning, the IRWINP programs. And she's specifically looking at a requirement, and I don't believe that you're actually in an IRWINP. But if you are in IRWINP, what she's specifically asking for is that they identify the amount of energy it's taking to transport and move water. And this is part of a larger discussion that's also in the scoping plan, and it's a little bit of why it's sort of, we're all very interested, it's piquing our interest, is the movement of water and the amount of energy it takes to move that water. I don't know if there's a direct impact on the city or water and power initially, but what that might lead to is some of the questions that we're trying to understand and answer.
Right, because the industry out there say that it takes like 25% of the electric load to move and transport
Right.
water. So any kind of reduction in that is significant in the terms of electric demand.
Right, right. And so we want to see what they're thinking of. We haven't seen what Senator Pavley is specifically looking at other than looking at it. Is she asking or looking at a requirement in terms of reduction of that or looking at new alternatives? She's mentioned it a couple of times in discussions on the water bond about the amount of energy that's used. What we haven't seen is what she wants to do about that yet.
So potentially for the local impact, if we were to be at 25% or higher, then if this bill passes where it does include that language in there, we potentially maybe would be required to reduce that percentage as well, so that we spend less energy to convey our water, pumping, or even distribution. So that's something that I guess we would pay attention to.
Yeah, yeah. And one of the things that we'll do is get the details out to Water and Power so that they can share that with you and that we can get any direct impacts that may have and then use that to develop a position.
Great. Well, perfect timing. Commissioner Hale just joined us, and we about to wrap up the session on legislative updates and water bonds. And Mr. Bragg gave us an update on potentially 3 to 4 shovel-ready projects. And I think it may not be needed, but I think this commission is supportive of those projects to move ahead with the request for additional funds. So, Commissioner Hale, do you have any updates or any comments? Not then. I think more to come. I think we'll have another update next month on some of the more, filled up legislation. I think they'll put more meat to the bone as we start the dialogue.
Yeah, certainly.
Great. Thank you, Ms. Ross. Okay, so let's go to the next item.
4C, customer service update.
Good afternoon, President Yao, members of the Commission. I'm Tammy Valier, Customer Services Administrator. At the September meeting, I informed you of a new payment option, Pay Near Me. And Pay Near Me is where customers can pay their utility bills in cash at all of the 7-Eleven stores. We went live in October, and I'm happy to report that we had a very smooth transition. The first thing we needed to do was get the information out to the public, and our marketing department led that effort. And they did many press releases, they Twittered and Facebook posts. There was an article in The Source, an article in The Connections. They put it on our website, and of course they put posters and balloons at all of our counters in our lobby spaces. And the cashiers as well were notifying customers of that option if the lines got too long. Since October, 387 payments have been received. It doesn't seem like a real high volume. However, keep in mind it is still very new. Customers may have received one, possibly two utility bills with the barcode on them. But it's a no-cost service for Glendale. It's automated so we can bring the payments into the system very easily. And truly it is working towards our target of reducing the walk-in customers at the front counter. Of the payments that we received, 83% were made at Glendale locations, 66% of those being within 1 mile of our office, and 45% of those were made during regular business hours. So customers seem to be using them as a convenience, not necessarily the location. The payments represent 290 different customers. 49 of the customers used it more than 2 times or more. I think we had one customer that used it 5 times, probably making payments in installments, which that indicates that the customers are satisfied with the service. As I mentioned, Glendale 7-Eleven stores have the highest use, but payments have been made in 18 additional cities. Some of those cities are Burbank, Canoga Park, Cathedral City, San Pedro, La Cañada, Tahunga, Sunland. So it is being used all over. Again, it was a very simple implementation. We haven't received any negative feedback from our customers. They do have to pay a $2.99 fee. We haven't had any complaints. The vendor has notified us promptly through email of each payment so we can stop any termination of service if there's a disconnect pending. And to date, we're very pleased with the option.
Questions about that? So I just have curious about the multiple payment item. So does the customer pay each time they're making a, I guess, progress payment?
Yes. I will tell you, though, that some of those multiple payments are paid 2 blocks down the street during our business hours where they could come and pay in the office, but for whatever reason, it's more convenient for them, and they're choosing to go there.
So the way the system works, as soon as a customer makes a payment, GWP gets an email
Correct.
notification. So there is no direct routing of that into some sort of a payment system that automatically makes the payment?
The payment, it's the Pay Near Me payment is through 7-Eleven.
Right.
And then the Pay Near Me sends us the automatic email. We receive we post those payments that night because they're guaranteed since they're cash payments. So we post it to the customers' accounts that night.
Manually, though?
No, well, it's really just a file transfer.
Okay.
So we don't have to re-enter each one
All right.
separately. It's a file transfer. It just gets uploaded straight to the CIS. So it's very automated.
Is that file transfer done by a person?
Yes.
Okay. Okay. Got it.
It's really just triggered by a person to upload.
Okay. So, okay, I got it. All right. I was just wondering if it's a direct transaction that happens in real time and the customer sees the actual payment, in the same real time versus the next day. So
They would see it pending. They would see a pending payment, and they would see the actual payment posted the following day.
okay.
Yeah, is there any way we can do any kind of outreach to a customer that might be using the Pay Near Me to do installment plans? Because chances are this person is probably low income and they're getting the surcharge on top of their payment. Yeah, it's...
That's not necessarily always true.
Okay.
Some very folks are making installment payments who do have the means. It just happens to be the situation they're in. But I know we have a pretty good blurb on our website about this. I don't know if it goes into a lot of detail about the fee and the expediency of bringing it in if it's multiple payments. I don't know.
Yeah, probably not the speed of how fast the payment gets to us, but the fee is definitely listed as a convenience fee.
I'm sure it's relatively transparent when the person's making the payment, but maybe some sort of outreach about low-income programs or other payment assistance plans that the utility offers itself, or just let them know that they can walk across the street and come to the window. But anyhow,
I think
just curious.
Most of those customers were paying across the street, and
yeah, that's the weird thing.
I think a lot of those customers typically call us every month to make payment arrangements. We have a lot of repeat customers that make payment arrangements with us, and maybe they get paid weekly, and it's just they pick up their lotto tickets and pay their bill at the same time. I'm not really sure, but we'll continue to watch it and see if there is more outreach that we might want to do.
This brings up the question of potential goal setting. I'm sure it's a great benefit for the city because they get a bit, the revenue, and they don't really have, it's not in an automated process, sounds like. So it's a good deal for the city and GWP. So there's no way we can increase that, even though it is go against what Commissioner Hale was saying, how low-income customer might be doing these type of transactions. But potentially, if we do increase the service and more people do participate and pay through 7-Eleven, it relieves the pressure on GWP staff to handle those payments. So can we do additional outreach to promote it more? I know that we launched recently, but would there be maybe a goal to double that rate by next year? I know from 300 something to 600 something might not sound like a big deal, but at least we consistently promote it so that people know about it, and if they do want the convenience factor, then they can go ahead and pay at 7-Eleven.
I don't know if we necessarily want to promote just this one. This is just one tool of many. Our goal, our target is to reduce walk-in customers. So that's really what our goal is. And then to push customers to other options. We have other options that are even, not low, this is no cost, but very low cost to us when people use their home banking, for example, through eBill. If they use the direct debit program, that's very inexpensive, very automated. So again, our goal is to decrease the walk-in customers, and these are just several different tools and options in order to make that happen.
Is there a fee for us to use for 7-Eleven to transfer those funds and
No.
connect?
There's no fee to GWP.
Oh, okay.
There's a fee to the customer.
Right. So even to set up all those communications and
Nothing.
And we do publicize all of those options regularly,
Right.
because we would love you to pay your bill some other way than walking in.
Right.
Unfortunately, I think we have a pretty solid customer base who will do nothing other than bring in their money. You do see it among certain, maybe more along the seniors who don't have some level of distrust of computers and computer systems. There's still people who have distrust of banks, period. So, cash payments in person, they're assured that their payment gets made and that their service is maintained. But with that said, we continue to push hard to get folks to use other means to make their payments so that we can help reduce the walk-in customers and the load that is on our customer service folks.
Yeah, sure, those are great. And I thought maybe any IT upgrades that GDP is making to accommodate this extra payment, those are some costs now that if we get more customers to utilize, then it's already been implemented. So that was my thinking behind that, to increase more customers to use that channel.
Question: do we know what it costs each time a consumer makes a payment at the building?
We're actually working on that right now. I believe the last time we updated the cashiering, it was very many years ago, but it was over $4
Each
per transaction. So the payment center supervisors is working on what all of those fees are, so we will know. Some of the harder fees to really determine are some of the credit card, the ones where we accept credit card payments, because you have merchant rubbish fees, and that gets very convoluted as far as what kind of card they used, did they swipe the card? There's a lot that goes into it. But definitely the cash sharing payments are by far the most expensive.
Okay. Yeah, I think it'll be a good idea to see what that what that cost is, and then you kind of make now you can plan it out and see how much marketing dollars you should actually put into trying to get that number of outside payments up, because maybe sometimes if you spend too much marketing dollars, it's not worth the actual cost you're saving, especially if a big bulk of those payments are coming in cash, which there's a very low chance that's going to change in the next 10 to 20 years.
Should we come up with
Yeah, question. So I don't recall, what are the total numbers in terms of the walk-in traffic that we get on a monthly or annual basis? Do you recall?
Yes, we have about 7,300 cash sharing payments per month.
So it kind of speaks to the concept. I don't hear you saying that we have a particular target overall for reduction. We aim to reduce, but we don't necessarily have a target.
Well, we do. We actually are, as you know, we're in the middle of discussing the strategic plan and setting some goals. And originally, we submitted 3% per year reduction for all of those customer contacts, whether it was walk-in, telephone, or cash sharing. But in thinking about that a little bit more, I think we can go to probably 5% on the cash sharing. Telephones are going to be a little bit more difficult, especially if we do have some mandatory water rationing. It's going to be really hard to reduce some of those phone calls. But I think we could probably get 5% per year for the cash sharing.
Okay, thank you.
But we're still discussing those.
Anybody else? No? Thank you, Mr.
All right,
Gallet.
thank you.
Thank you.
Next item, please.
4D, near drawer stream update.
Good afternoon, Commissioners. Ramon Abueg. A couple of months ago, you received a letter from residents of the West Side Stream, Niagara, and we came back to you and let you know that we're doing a feasibility study on the cost and running the wells. Just to give you background, back in September of 2013 is when we shut down the wells because of basically it's not producing what it's supposed to. And 2 months later, prior to that, we sent letters to the customer, to our customers affected that we'll be shutting the wells on November 15th, which we did. And during that time, we've done feasibility studies, and two things that we're finding out is there's not as much water that's available in the basin like we were having before. The depth of the water, the static depth, although it's from the time we shut it down or before we shut it down, it's down below 40 feet. After we shut it down, went up to 32 feet. But when we are pumping water, the depth of the wells or the water is about 90 feet, and the depth, the bottom of the well is at 100 feet. So there's not much water that's available. We have not made a commitment one way or the other, but what we're looking at are different options to how we can make this work for both us and as well as the residents because of their concern about the historic preservation. There's options, but we are not committed to one or the other. But the main thing that we know with the current production of the wells, the water available, is actually costing us more to produce water from the wells than it is to buy water from MWD. And the difference in cost, it's right now the cost of water from MWD is about $890 per acre foot, and we're looking at about a little bit over $1,000 per acre foot of production from the wells if we are producing at the level that we are. So that's a short update just to let you know we are continuing to look at it and looking at potential options.
And just to add to that, we met with some of the residents last week, and we're planning a larger, broader meeting to go out and talk to the neighborhood and whoever's interested in attending and just give them an update on where we're at as well.
Was there a, Mr. Blake, thank you for the update, but was there a final report that's supposed to be due, or is this this is a progress report, or is it a final report?
This is a progress report, because what we'd like to put together when we do the final report is make recommendations on what we should be doing. The main thing is, under the drought conditions, we can't turn on the water or the pipe anyway. It's so that I believe is helping us buy some time trying to put together a proposal, in addition to what we found out.
Yeah, it'd be great to have those updates on the legality of the findings too, because I think from the last update there were some issues on clarifying who signed what and what day, and so there were some issues between that. So we can get some clarity on that too in the final report. That would be helpful.
Well, what we know now is all the documents that were cited by the other parties. There aren't too many documents that we can find from way back in the 80s and the 90s. And so what we're going by is what we have, and trying to do the right thing both for the water system and as well as the citizens.
All right, thank you. So to be continued then.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. All right, next item, please.
5, oral communications.
Let's see, I don't have any cards. No. So close. No, the item's closed. Next item, please.
6, agenda forecast.
So let's see. Are we still on schedule for the next meeting?
Mr. Yao, everything looks good with the exception of the cost of service analysis that we have it listed as tentative, but we may not be able to make that in April. We've had a couple of issues that have come up, and that has pushed the whole schedule, actually, with regards to the rates. So I think I can best phrase it by saying we're going to make sure it's done right this time. So if it takes an extra month, it will be done right. I have made that, I've mentioned that to you gentlemen before, and I've certainly said that to my boss, the city manager, and the council as well. So unfortunately, it's one of those situations where you lift this rock and there's 3 more things you hadn't expected, and we want to make sure we run those all to ground, that our auditor has a chance to QA/QC this thing, and to make sure that when we bring it to first you and then to subsequently to the council, that it's solid.
And that's fine. I think we have a lot on the agenda anyway.
Yeah.
So
It's a pretty busy evening. The budget is still tentative, and we'll work through that. I want to make sure that we don't shortchange the budget presentation either, and make sure that we have enough time to talk about it. So we'll weigh that factor as well.
So for April, we'll have the budget discussion for sure?
Not for sure, no. It's still tentative.
Tentative.
And then are we pushing the cost of service analysis to the May meeting? Is that what we're saying, or do you think?
Yes, that's probably what it'll be, is we're going to keep the water rate discussion on for May, and hopefully we don't have to bump that. There's an outside chance we will, depending on how our schedule goes. But we're going to keep it for now, and we'll roll the cost of service analysis presentation into that, because we wouldn't bring you the rates. We wouldn't be able to bring you the rate discussion until we had the cost of services analysis finalized.
Okay.
We were just going to try to get it a little bit earlier, and it just hasn't worked that well.
So let's go through the April meeting. We're going to have the energy risk management update, the water services division update, strategic plan outlook, KPI update, water supply and drought preparation update, and then the last 2, cost of service, moved to May, and the GP budget is tentative.
Correct.
Any other items for the agenda? What about the presentation of your Great Diamond Award achievement? So I was surprised that it wasn't mentioned in the staff comments. Any suggestion that you want to put that in? Recognize people?
Yes, we'll probably make that presentation to you when we come back from receiving the award, and then we'll have the award. I don't know if APPA staff is interested in coming down. So once we have the award in hand, we'll we'll do that. That is April.
April 7th, actually, the day you come back. We
Yeah.
cannot,
We'll be carrying it in on the plane and bring it right to you. You'll be the first to see it.
yeah, unfortunately, one of the rules for the APP announcement is we cannot do any, basically any publication until after they officially hand it to us, so.
Once we have it, we'll make a big deal about it.
Yeah, but we can announce it and stuff. I mean,
We actually have a couple. We have another award as well that we received from CMUA that has the same conditions, that we not say anything about it until we actually get it, but that's for part of our conservation program, and it has to do with our SIVA screens. So
and when would that take place?
that is next month as well, I believe, is when actually the two conferences are at the same time, I think. So we'll collect that and bring that back to you as well.
So potentially for the May meeting, there'll be some awards presentations, and then you can
Correct.
bring some people to be recognized. Potentially, if
Yes,
all the hard work in getting the
Absolutely.
documentation and stuff.
absolutely.
Okay. Nothing else? Is there anything else? Nothing else? Then is there a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Any
Second.
All in favor? Say aye.
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 Meeting's adjourned. Thank you, everyone.